All right, I'm playing.
Okay.
Rolling.
So if you want to introduce yourself first.
My name is Will Stell. I am Associate Director in Campus Ministry and Associate Director in the Center for Peace and Justice Education. With that comes Adjunct Professor of Peace and Justice. And I teach 2 courses in Peace and Justice, Growing into Justice Through Agriculture in the fall, and Ethical Issues in Peace and Justice in the spring, which has a theology, ethics, and environmental studies attribute attached to it.
Okay, great. So could you define sustainability in your own terms? I know it's kind of broad, but
Yeah, in my own terms. I'll just offer a critique that I have learned. And so sustainability, an immensely important concept that's grown in our societal awareness over the last decade in particular. It's become more popularized and used as a term. I believe one of the more general definitions of it is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of the future. But at this state, and with everything that we're dealing with in terms of environmental degradation, depletion of resources, growing population, a lot of the supply diminishing and demand increasing, just keeping the status quo may not be enough. And so some of the things that I'm interested in studying and teach have to do with alternative practices that try to focus more on terms like degenerative systems or regenerative systems. So taking sort of a holistic or integral systems approach to the way we do anything, particularly agriculture with the classes that I teach. There are ways to actually maximize better the way nature works in order to, within those parameters, have a greater yield and greater flourishing. So to create, so even right now, the status quo, which is the way I generally think about sustainability, is how can we just maintain. There's a lot of work that we can do to improve what's been degraded, and so I think that's partially built into that awareness, but the rebuilding of soils, the reversing desertification, which is taking place often due to climate change, but also poor agricultural practices. Those are the types of things that I think go a little further than sustainability that I'm interested in offering as food for thought.
So going off of that, could you kind of relay what the goals of your center are in regards to sustainability? So you talked about having courses and kind of teaching possible sustainability measures and meeting the status quo. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that, or what in general the goals of your center are?
Which center are we talking about?
The Peace and Justice
Okay.
Center. Yeah.
Peace and Justice
Or
Center.
specifically your.
Yeah, in terms of sustainability, well, obviously it's very appropriate within Peace and Justice because there's generally within our courses as a very valuable and overtly simplified definition of social justice, we talk about right relationship. And so right relationship is a concept that can also be extended beyond just human relations and human systems. And so looking at the way human beings can reorient ourselves to a more beneficial relationship with the earth, non-human living beings, as well as just the rock under our feet in a way, right? I think it's something that has to do with that right relationship or that sense of justice. That, and then you see that a lot of the issues of environmental justice, climate change, they're going to be impacting an enormous number of people that are the most poor, the most vulnerable, the most at the margins, and with the least power. So sustainability and environmental justice are really sort of just key ways of looking at issues we've been addressing all along, and just another dimension of them that is really vital. So that's why it's very appropriate to be dealing with that within the Center for Peace and Justice. Within the courses that I teach, can you ask a little more specific question about what you're looking at?
Well, why don't you talk about what courses you teach specifically? So we saw courses that Peace and Justice Center, they teach like ecofeminism and caring for the earth. What courses do you teach, and how do you relate that to sustainability?
Okay, so the first course that I ever taught was this core course for peace and justice called Ethical Issues in Peace and Justice, and I was given sort of carte blanche to design it from the beginning again. And so with that, I used the beginning part to establish more or less sort of an introduction to peace and justice by starting off the course with sort of a key conceptual toolbox to help students analyze these issues, not only in the class, but in their own lives. We can go into greater depth with those, but simple terms like right relationship and so forth. Getting more into the theology attributes, so there's much more of the Christian Catholic dimension, as well as some other religious and wisdom tradition perspectives that are brought in. But the class in particular looks at major trends within more or less modern history that give us the backdrop of a lot of the issues of injustice or inequity, or the opposite of right relationship in a way, that are in our present situation. And so one of them is colonialization. And so all of the patterns and dynamics and consequences of that trend in history, and how those patterns are just sort of transferred to other dynamics in our present day, so that students can see those. Industrialization was a major force in human history that has had tremendous benefits and has had a good degree of drawbacks and damage, that destructive things that have been done. So the tough thing in the class is we're just focusing on those elements a lot of the time, and not necessarily always the benefits. But from there, globalization in particular, and how that's really changed the way we think about human relationships, how we think about national, social policies, economics, you name it, right? The world is a much smaller place because of globalization and technology. With that, we lead into the semester break, into fall break, heading into looking at sort of the current environmental crisis. And I use an author, Lester Brown, who is the president of the Earth Policy Institute in D.C. And he has a book called, it's had 4 or 5 different revisions, called Plan B. I use a later version of it now, which highlights those factors I was alluding to earlier, that there are diminishing supply issues and growing demand issues, particularly with, he keys in on the weak link, and the thing that we really have to be the most concerned with is food. So there's a growing demand for food and the types of food, particularly as we develop countries and people move into the middle class, their appetite for more animal products like meat, milk, and eggs grows. Those are much more intensive in the way the inputs that they need, the land and the water that they use, just to produce sort of the same calorie output as more plant-based diets. So that's a trend. I could go on at length with this, so
it's very broad.
Stop me if you'd like to ask me
I mean,
more.
that's great.
But I'll just transition one moment. So looking at the food, it comes out of some of the food crises, the price crisis. There were a lot of revolts and social unrest in 2008, 9, 7 even, when food prices for most basic commodities were at an all-time high, and a lot of people couldn't afford to feed their families. So that's sort of the weak link to destabilizing a lot of other things, and that has a lot to do with the way we use our natural resources in relation to it. And what's interesting is these trends through history have led us to this point, and at the same time, these environmental impacts, climate change, and so forth are going to double those destructive impacts and consequences, because the most poor and vulnerable are the first ones to be hit by it. So from there, we venture into more of the exploration of the environment, sustainability, more of a liberal arts contributions and perspectives as to how we can evaluate this. And we get from broader concepts to more practical planning, like transition towns at the very end of the semester, which is your hometown media,
Yeah.
Pennsylvania, is a transition town. The students have to design a project in the will. So we try to always lead for empowerment and practical outcomes in the way that we design the course.
Yeah, that sounds great.
The second course, and I'll be more brief with this, Shar Arman, who is an ACS professor, approached me about co-teaching 2 years ago. This is the third time we've offered Growing into Justice Through Agriculture, and it really focuses primarily on sustainable agriculture and food justice. So we look at the history of agriculture as connected to the history of civilization, current issues, and it's a fantastic course because through food system you can get to almost any other issue of peace or justice, from race, class, and gender issues, global politics, and issues of environmental degradation, labor practices, you name it. And I find it really valuable because everybody eats, so it's consistently relevant to whoever's in the class in ways that they discover more and more. And so what we do also is that students have to do 8 to 10 hours of farm work at a local organic farm, or there are some options in the suburbs. And
That's so interesting.
Thank you. I think one of the things that really helps is that they have an applied, real-world sort of practice.
Is that in lieu of like class time then?
No, it's in addition to.
Okay.
We really should. We've been trying to see if we can get sort of a 1-credit lab attribute attached
Yeah.
to it, because it's really kind of what it deserves. Because in addition to those 8 to 10 hours, we also do a day field trip / retreat. I guess it's more of a field trip to the Center for Environmental Transformation in Camden, New Jersey, which is.
If that was like an MSc, I would definitely take it. That sounds
What's that?
cool. If that was a mental science experience.
Oh, okay.
Like the one where it's like,
If you're getting the 1-credit lab, you know.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah.
Look into
we can
that.
Talk more about that later, because I'm interested in hearing ways to connect to that for sure. Because we're doing our part for more of the liberal arts ends of
Yeah.
arts and sciences, including science, but focusing more on humanities and social sciences. Camden, where the Center for Environmental Transformation is, who the president of their board is Dr. Mark Dorley, who runs our ethics program, is an unfortunate textbook example of environmental justice. So they get to explore and see and experience that place for a day. Many of whom have gone back and returned later or the trips there.
Very cool.
And throughout the course, we get to where the issues are, but then to alternative practices that people are doing. So looking at biodynamic agriculture, looking at permaculture, looking at transition towns as a way that the food system's integrated into social systems in a way. Having students explore various alternative sort of organizations, agencies, startups, activists, you name it, that are doing this type of work for their projects. We have a whole ton of speakers that we have come in, from permaculturists to our own dining services staff. Tim Dietzel is a whiz, and he and Jim Columban, who's their dietitian here, both vegans. Didn't start out that way, but the more they learn they were, and so they have a tremendous amount of information they share and show how they've been bringing this to Illinois. Catholic Relief Services for global perspective we just had last week. I have an old friend and colleague who works at Supply Chain Sustainability at McDonald's who came in to speak. So I think I'm getting a little I'm railing on a little bit again.
no, it's fine. It's awesome to see like the outreach and the extent.
It's
to which
really
you guys
interesting.
go, and you really involve the students. So you talked about how in the beginning you talked to them about the injustices and how it's important to have the justice of food equality and everything, and then you kind of go into more of the practicalities and you give them like on-hands research, so they go to these different places. Can you talk as like a last question and a last talking point, what's the student response to this afterwards? Do they go and do things on their own and kind of see what else they can do for it outside of the course, or do they talk to you
which
about.
course in particular?
Well, the first one you talked about how you go into more of the practicalities of things. Do they go off and try and join a program, maybe part of Peace and Justice to
Like water for
learn more?
Waslala.
Yeah.
Or the other one you said if someone goes back to get an internship. Do you see a heavy student response to this and they go out on
I
their
think we see an encouraging student response to this. So, in the spring course, Ethical Issues in Peace and Justice, because of the theology attribute, sometimes we get folks who just don't want to do theology outright and want to have it integrated to these issues. And so I love the course because we get this really great mix of where people are coming from. Some people have no familiarity with this at all because it's sort of fulfilling a core requirement and they're just beginning down this road. Others are peace and justice minors or concentrators or environmental studies, and they bring a lot to the table to begin with. We've seen them get more into particular issues because there's a practicum that I do where they have to do advocacy during our advocacy week, Table and Queer on campus, which is another project that we started a long time ago. They get more involved in specific issues. They get more involved in programs here on campus. They want to lead the trips back to certain sites we have a connection with. So the Center for Environmental Transformation, several people from the spring class decided they went on the fall break trip first choice because they wanted to have a longer, greater, deeper experience of the place. Some other students from the agriculture class in particular sort of found a way in which the food system or the environment and ecological consciousness can weave into career paths. So one person really wanted to work with victims of domestic violence and trafficking victims, and her final project was looking at some people that are doing this, and part of the therapy is sort of an ecotherapy where they're working on gardens and farms.
Oh, wow.
Other people looked at how they're doing that in prisons, and the statistics are incredible in terms of the therapeutic value of connecting people, even to just the sight of a living tree outside of their cell has a tremendous psychological impact.
That's really interesting.
Demonstrative. We had groups such as Food Justice, or Just Food, I'm sorry, as an offshoot of the course. So a student group started. One person in particular, an example is they wanted to do occupational therapy, but now they want to do that within the context of using more of the environmental or ecological approach to that. An engineer wanted to steered himself in a direction now where, even though he's mechanical, he wants to do food systems.
So they have an obvious impact on the students.
Yeah, I think it does. So the specificity of the class and the way that we engage it and really try to make it personally relevant to like highlight how it's already relevant and connected to their lives, hopefully gives them opportunities to discover what they're passionate about and so a starting point for a direction.
And they can kind of incorporate it into their lives. That's awesome. Yeah, that there's a connectedness between that. And like even like engineers, that's surprising.
I have a question.
We had engineers,
So,
nurses, we had everyone in those.
I know that engineers can get a sustainability minor.
Mhm.
Can arts and sciences also get a sustainability minor, or is
Yeah,
that?
I believe that the course offerings in that minor are varied enough where there's not things that require you can get it and have more of this. The requirements are more along the science and engineering end,
Mhm.
right, or STEM end, and then there's enough offerings. So
Arts and humanities.
Yeah.
Do you have to know what department it's offered through?
What's that?
What department it's offered through?
Geography and the environment is
Okay.
The undergrad offering through arts and sciences, but then there's a sustainability master's degree that my old friend and roommate had just recently gotten.
It's cool.
And I think they have a certificate for that, and I don't know, but I think they're developing an undergrad curriculum as well, so perhaps for a certificate. Don't quote me on that entirely, but
Okay.
I think it's probably inevitable.
Insider
too.
knowledge.
That would happen. So.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Water questions, but that was the whole.
Yeah, well, I mean, we talked to 2 other institutions, and that